I looked through my kitchen window that Tuesday morning and saw something that made my coffee nearly slip from my hand. Because where there used to be nothing but trees and grass in my forest clearing, there was now a massive wooden structure taking shape with workers swarming around it like ants on a dropped sandwich. My name is Scott Walters, and I had been living in my house just outside Asheville, North Carolina for about 6 years. When I bought the property, one of the main selling points was the 20 acres of forested land that came with it. The house sat near the road, and behind it stretched a beautiful expanse of oak and pine trees with a natural clearing about 300 feet from my back deck. I used to take my morning coffee out there, sit on a fallen log, and just enjoy the peace and quiet. The neighborhood, if you could call it that, was loosely organized. Houses were spread far apart, each on large plots of land. About 3 years ago, some of the newer residents had pushed to form a homeowners association. I had voted against it, along with several other original homeowners, but we were outvoted by the influx of new people who moved here from cities, and apparently could not function without someone telling them what color to paint their mailboxes. I had mostly ignored the HOA since then. They sent their little notices about dues, which I paid to avoid hassle, and occasionally someone would send a letter about trimming the hedges near the road or some other minor thing. But I kept to myself, maintained my property reasonably well, and figured that would be enough. Apparently, I was wrong. I set down my coffee and walked outside, not even bothering to put on shoes. The morning dew soaked through my socks as I crossed my backyard and followed the worn path through the trees toward the clearing. As I got closer, I could hear the sounds of construction more clearly. The buzz of power saws, the thump of hammers, men shouting to each other over the noise. When I emerged from the tree line into the clearing, I stopped dead. The structure was already substantially built, a large frame design that looked like it was meant to be some kind of lodge or meeting hall. The footprint had to be at least 2,000 square feet. Workers were everywhere, some on ladders working on the roof beams, others carrying lumber, a few operating a small crane that was lifting materials. "Hey," I shouted, walking toward the nearest worker. "Hey, what the hell is going on here?" The worker, a younger guy in a hard hat and reflective vest, looked at me with confusion. "Sir, you need to stay back from the construction zone." "This is my property," I said, feeling my blood pressure rising. "This is my land. Who authorized this?" The worker's expression shifted to uncertainty. I don't know anything about that. We were hired by the Meadowbrook HOA. You need to talk to them. I'm just doing the work I was contracted for." "The HOA?" I felt like I was losing my mind. "The HOA hired you to build on my land." He shrugged apologetically. "Like I said, sir, I just work here. The project manager might know more. That's him over there, the guy with the clipboard." I stormed over to the project manager, a middle-aged man with graying hair and a weathered face that suggested he had been in construction for decades. "I'm Scott Walters, and this is my property," I said, trying to keep my voice level. "Who gave you permission to build here?" The project manager consulted his clipboard, flipping through several pages. "Says here this is community land, designated for the Meadowbrook HOA Community Lodge. We got all the permits from the county. Everything is above board." "It's not community land," I said. "It's my land. This entire clearing is part of my 20-acre property." His eyebrows went up. "Sir, I don't know what to tell you. We were provided a survey and property documents showing this as HOA land. If there's a dispute, you need to take it up with them. I can't just stop work based on someone walking up and claiming ownership. I'd never get anything built." He had a point, but that did nothing to calm me down. "Who do I talk to at the HOA?" "The contact on my paperwork is a Sharon Pembroke. She's the HOA president. Her number should be in your community directory. I stomped back to my house, my socks now completely ruined and my mood thoroughly destroyed. Inside, I dug through the pile of mail I usually ignored until I found the latest HOA newsletter. Sure enough, there was Sharon Pembroke's name with a phone number listed as the HOA president. I dialed the number, my hand shaking slightly with anger. "Hello, this is Sharon," came a sweet voice that sounded like honey poured over steel. "Sharon, this is Scott Walters from 4892 Pine Ridge Road. There's a construction crew building something on my property right now, and they claim you authorized it." "Oh, Mr. Walters. Yes, isn't it exciting? We're building a community lodge. It's going to have meeting spaces, a small kitchen, maybe even a library. It will really bring the community together." "It's on my property," I said slowly, enunciating each word. "No, it's on the community clearing," Sharon corrected, her voice taking on a slightly sharper edge. "The designated HOA community space. It's all in the bylaws that were voted on last year. I own that clearing. It's part of my 20 acres. There was a pause. "Mr. Walters, I don't know where you're getting your information, but the HOA conducted a survey last year. That clearing is outside all private property boundaries. It's a shared community space, which is exactly what makes it perfect for a community lodge. I have my original property survey from when I bought this house," I said. "That clearing is definitely on my land." "Well, our survey says otherwise. Perhaps your survey is outdated or incorrect. These things happen. But we've done our due diligence, obtained all necessary permits from Henderson County, and construction is moving forward. The lodge should be completed in about 6 weeks. I do hope you'll come to the grand opening. We're planning quite a celebration." "Stop construction immediately," I demanded. "I'm getting my survey documents and I'm going to prove that's my land." "Mr. Walters, I can't stop construction based on an unfounded claim. If you believe there's an error, you're welcome to file a dispute through the proper channels. The HOA board meets next Tuesday at 7. You can present your case then. But until the board votes to halt construction, the project continues. Have a lovely day." She hung up before I could respond. I spent the rest of the morning tearing through my filing cabinets looking for my original property documents. I found them eventually, buried in a folder marked House Purchase 2019. The survey was clear, detailed, and professional. It showed my property boundaries, and the clearing was definitely, unquestionably within those boundaries. It was a good 150 feet from the nearest property line. I made copies of everything, then called a surveyor I found online who had good reviews. A woman named Patricia Chen answered and listened to my situation. "I can come out tomorrow morning," she said. "But I have to warn you, if there's construction already happening, this is going to be complicated. You might need a lawyer too." "I was afraid you'd say that." Next, I called an attorney. I explained the situation to 3 different law offices before I found one willing to take what they called an emergency consultation. The lawyer, Thomas Erickson, could see me that afternoon. His office was in downtown Asheville, in one of the old brick buildings that had been renovated into modern office space. Thomas was younger than I expected, maybe in his mid-30s, with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. I laid out all my documents on his desk, explained the situation, and showed him photos I had taken that morning of the construction. Thomas examined everything carefully, taking his time. Finally, he looked up at me. "This is pretty straightforward, actually," he said. "If this survey is accurate, and it certainly looks legitimate, then the HOA is building on your private property without permission. That's trespassing, and possibly something more serious depending on whether they knew it was your land. They claim they have their own survey showing it's community land. I'd like to see that survey. In fact, I'd like to see all their documentation, including how they obtained permits for construction. The county shouldn't have issued permits without proper proof of land ownership or rights. He leaned back in his chair. Here's what I recommend. First, we get your surveyor out there to confirm your property lines. Second, I'm going to file for an immediate injunction to stop construction. Third, we're going to request all documentation from the HOA regarding their supposed survey and permits. How long will that take? The injunction might take a few days, maybe a week if we're lucky. But Mr. Walters, I have to ask, have you had any disputes with the HOA before this? No, I pretty much ignored them, paid my dues, kept my property decent, stayed out of their way. Thomas nodded slowly. Sometimes these HOAs develop a kind of empire mentality. They start thinking they have more authority than they actually do, or sometimes there's incompetence involved. They might genuinely believe they surveyed correctly. Either way, you're in the right here based on what I'm seeing. What's this going to cost me? He named a retainer fee that made me wince but was not completely unreasonable. I agreed, signed his paperwork, and left feeling slightly better about the situation. At least I was taking action. That evening, I walked back out to the clearing. The workers had left for the day, but they had made substantial progress. The frame of the lodge was mostly complete now. It was impressive, actually, in an infuriating sort of way. They were building a beautiful structure on my land without my permission. I took more photos, documenting everything. As I was walking around the perimeter, I noticed stakes in the ground with orange tape on them. Survey markers, presumably from the HOA's survey. I took pictures of those too, noting their positions. The next morning, Patricia Chen arrived right on time. She was a small woman in her 50s with equipment that looked extremely professional and expensive. I showed her my original survey, and she got to work. I watched as she set up her instruments, took readings, consulted GPS coordinates, and methodically worked her way around the property. It took hours. I brought her water and sandwiches at lunch, and she worked straight through, only pausing long enough to eat while looking at her computer. Around 3 in the afternoon, she finally came to find me on my back deck. "Well," I asked. "Your original survey is accurate," she said, setting down her equipment. "I've confirmed your property boundaries using GPS and county records. That clearing is entirely on your property, not even close to the boundary line. The nearest property line is about 170 feet from the lodge construction." Relief washed over me. "Can you put that in writing? I'll have a full report for you by tomorrow with maps and everything. But Mr. Walters, I found something interesting. Those survey stakes out there with the orange tape. They're positioned wrong, not just by a little bit. They're off by a significant margin. Either whoever placed them was completely incompetent or they were placed incorrectly on purpose." That hit me like a cold splash of water. On purpose. I can't say for certain, but in my 20 years doing this, I've never seen a survey error this large that was made by accident. Professional surveyors don't make mistakes like this. We're talking about being off by more than 100 feet. That doesn't happen unless someone doesn't know what they're doing or someone is being dishonest. After she left, I sat on my deck and thought about that. Had the HOA deliberately placed fake survey markers to make it look like the clearing was community property? That seemed insane. But then again, building a massive lodge without absolutely confirming land ownership seemed pretty insane too. My lawyer called that evening. Good news and bad news. The good news is that I've filed for the injunction and the judge is taking it seriously. The bad news is that the earliest hearing we can get is next Monday. That's 4 days away. Construction will continue until then. Can't we do anything sooner? I've made some calls to the county building department. They're going to review the permits that were issued. If there's a problem with the permitting process, they might be able to stop it on their own authority. But don't count on that. Government moves slowly. That night, I barely slept. I kept thinking about the construction, about the HOA, about this Sharon Pembroke woman who had sounded so confident that they were in the right. Was she genuinely mistaken, or was something more sinister going on? Friday morning, I was awakened by construction noise at 7 o'clock sharp. I walked out to the clearing again, and this time I was more systematic. I took videos of everything, noting the positions of the survey stakes, the extent of the construction, everything. I even flew my drone over the site to get aerial footage showing the lodge's position relative to my house and the property lines. Around 9, a silver Mercedes SUV pulled up near the clearing. Out stepped a woman in her early 50s with perfectly styled blonde hair, expensive-looking athletic wear, and sunglasses that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. She walked toward the construction with the confidence of someone who owned the place. I intercepted her. "Are you Sharon Pembroke?" She turned to me, pulling off her sunglasses. Her smile was bright and utterly fake. "I am. And you must be Mr. Walters. I thought you might come by. Isn't the lodge coming along wonderfully?" "It's coming along on my property," I said. "Mr. Walters, we've been over this. This is community land. I know change can be difficult for some people, especially those who are used to having all this space to themselves. But the community voted for this project. Democracy in action. I have a surveyor's report confirming this is my private property." Her smile didn't waver. "I'm sure you do. You can hire anyone to write anything you want. The HOA had a professional survey done by a licensed company. That survey clearly shows this as community space. That's what the county used when issuing our permits." "What company did your survey?" "I'd have to check the records. We have everything properly filed, of course. Like I said, Mr. Walters, if you want to dispute this, come to the board meeting Tuesday night. Though honestly, I think you'll find you're mistaken about your property boundaries. It happens more often than you'd think." "There's going to be a court hearing Monday," I said, "about an injunction to stop this construction." That got a reaction. Her smile tightened slightly. "A lawsuit?" "Really, Mr. Walters? Over a community improvement project that will benefit everyone, including you? That seems rather selfish. Building on someone's private property without permission is called trespassing. It's illegal. If it were your property, which it's not. But fine, waste your money on lawyers if you must. The HOA has legal resources too, and I assure you our position is solid. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to check on the progress here. We're on a tight schedule." She walked past me toward the project manager. I watched her go, feeling my blood boil. There was something about her absolute certainty that bothered me even more than the construction itself. She genuinely seemed to believe she was in the right, or she was an excellent actress. Saturday and Sunday dragged by. The construction continued. By Sunday evening, the roof was being shingled and walls were going up. The lodge was starting to look like an actual building rather than just a frame. Monday morning, I dressed in the one suit I owned and met Thomas at the courthouse. The hearing was at 10 o'clock. We arrived early and went over our presentation one more time. We had my original survey, Patricia Chen's new survey confirming it, photographs, everything. The HOA's lawyer showed up at 5 minutes to 10. He was an older man, probably in his 60s, with an expensive suit and a leather briefcase that looked like it cost more than my car. Sharon Pembroke was with him, along with another woman I didn't recognize. The hearing was in front of Judge Martha Steinberg, a serious-looking woman in her 50s who had a reputation, according to Thomas, for not suffering fools. Thomas presented our case first, laying out the surveys, the photographs, the timeline. He was clear and concise, making it obvious that the construction was happening on my property. The HOA's lawyer, who introduced himself as Richard Carrington, countered with their own survey, showing the clearing as community property. But when Judge Steinberg asked to see the credentials of the surveyor who had done the work, things got interesting. This survey was conducted by Henderson County Survey Services, Richard said, a fully licensed operation. Judge Steinberg looked at the document. The signature here is illegible. Who specifically performed this survey? There was a pause. Richard consulted with Sharon in a whisper. We'll need to get that information from our files. You don't know who surveyed the property you're building on. The judge's tone could have frozen water. We have it in our records, Your Honor. The survey was arranged by the HOA board. I personally was not involved in that phase. Judge Steinberg turned to our side. And your surveyor is Patricia Chen of Chen Land Surveying, Thomas said. She's a licensed surveyor with over 20 years of experience. She's available to testify if needed. The judge reviewed both surveys carefully. The difference was stark. Mine showed clear GPS coordinates, detailed measurements, proper documentation. The HOA's survey was much more basic, almost simplistic. Here's what's going to happen, Judge Steinberg finally said. I'm granting a temporary injunction stopping all construction immediately, pending a full hearing on the property dispute. That hearing will be scheduled within 30 days. Mr. Carrington, your clients need to provide full documentation of their survey, including the name and credentials of whoever performed it, all field notes, all measurements. If Henderson County Survey Services is a legitimate company, that should be easy. Mr. Erickson, your client needs to provide the original deed and any other documentation of property ownership. Am I clear? Yes, Your Honor, both lawyers said. The construction stops today. Now, not tomorrow, not after they finish the roof. Now. I'll be sending the county building inspector out there this afternoon to confirm compliance. This hearing is adjourned. We walked out of the courthouse, and I felt like I could breathe again for the first time in days. That went well, Thomas said. Did you see their faces when the judge asked about their surveyor? They don't have proper documentation. I'd bet money on it. What happens now? Now they have to stop building. If they don't, they'll be in contempt of court, and that's a whole different level of problem for them. And they have to produce their survey documentation, which I suspect is going to be very interesting. He was right. That afternoon, I watched from my back deck as a county inspector showed up at the construction site. He spent about 20 minutes there, then the construction crew started packing up their equipment. By evening, the site was empty and silent. Tuesday came, the day of the HOA board meeting. I wasn't about to miss it. The meeting was held at a community center near the main neighborhood entrance, about 2 miles from my house. I arrived 15 minutes early. The room was set up with a long table at the front for the board members and several rows of folding chairs for attendees. About 20 people were there, most of whom I recognized vaguely from seeing them around the neighborhood over the years. Sharon Pembroke sat at the center of the board table, flanked by 4 other board members. When she saw me come in, her expression hardened, but she maintained her composure. The meeting started with typical HOA business, minutes from the last meeting, treasurer's report, discussion about landscaping contracts for the neighborhood entrance. Then came new business. I suppose we need to address the situation with the community lodge, Sharon said, her voice tight. As some of you may have heard, construction has been temporarily halted due to a legal dispute. Mr. Walters has made a claim that the lodge is being built on his private property. It's not a claim, I said from my seat. It's a fact. I have 2 surveys proving it. You're out of order, Mr. Walters. This is not an open forum. Actually, said one of the other board members, a man I didn't know, according to HOA bylaws, property owners can speak during new business items that directly affect them, and this definitely affects Mr. Walters. Sharon looked annoyed but nodded. Fine. Mr. Walters, you have 3 minutes. I stood up and walked to the front, holding my folder of documents. When I bought my property 6 years ago, I purchased 20 acres, which includes the clearing where you're building your lodge. I have the original survey from that purchase. Last week, I hired a professional surveyor to confirm those boundaries. Both surveys are in complete agreement. The clearing is on my private property, about 170 feet from the nearest property line. The HOA never asked my permission to build there. You just started construction. We had our own survey done, Sharon interjected. I'd like to see it. The court has ordered you to provide full documentation of that survey. Who did it? When? What were their credentials? Sharon exchanged glances with the other board members. That information is being compiled for the court. You don't know, do you? I looked at the other people in the room. She doesn't know who surveyed the property. Think about that. They broke ground on a $100,000 construction project without properly confirming they had the right to build there. That's not true, Sharon said, her voice rising. We did our due diligence. The survey was conducted and filed properly. Then show me. Show everyone here. Who did the survey? Silence. Sharon's face was getting red. Finally, another board member, an older woman named Dorothy, spoke up. Sharon, I think we need to see that survey documentation too. This is the board's liability we're talking about. I have everything in my files at home, Sharon said. I'll bring it to the next meeting. Why not just tell us who did the survey? I pressed. Because I don't remember off the top of my head. We review dozens of documents. I'm not a computer that can recall every detail instantly. But this is your biggest project. You're building a lodge. You'd remember something that important. The meeting devolved into chaos after that, with various homeowners asking questions, the board members arguing with each other, and Sharon trying unsuccessfully to maintain order. I sat back down and watched the disarray with grim satisfaction. The meeting ended without any real resolution, just a promise that everything would be addressed at the upcoming court hearing. Over the next 2 weeks, things got stranger. I noticed cars driving slowly past my house at odd hours. Nothing threatening, but definitely people keeping an eye on the property. I also started receiving anonymous letters in my mailbox, not through the postal service but hand-delivered, telling me to drop the lawsuit, that I was hurting the community, that I was being selfish. I gave all the letters to Thomas, who documented them carefully. This is harassment, he said. It doesn't help their case. The county building inspector called me one afternoon. Mr. Walters, I've been reviewing the permits that were issued for the HOA Lodge project. I need to ask you some questions. He came by that evening, a tired-looking man in his 40s named Jeff Morrison. I offered him coffee, and we sat at my kitchen table. Here's the thing, Jeff said. The permits were issued based on documentation showing the property as HOA community land. But when I went back through our files, something doesn't add up. The survey that was submitted with the permit application is dated last year, but when I called the company listed on it, Henderson County Survey Services, they have no record of doing any work for your HOA. No record at all. None. I talked to the owner personally. He was pretty upset that someone used his company's name without authorization. That's a serious offense. So the survey was faked. It looks that way. I've suspended all permits for the project pending an investigation. And I've referred this to the county attorney's office. If someone submitted fraudulent documents to obtain building permits, that's potentially criminal. After he left, I sat in my kitchen feeling a mix of vindication and disbelief. Someone in the HOA had submitted a fake survey to get permits. Who? Sharon Pembroke seemed the most likely candidate, but I couldn't be sure. The court hearing was scheduled for the following Monday. In the meantime, Thomas subpoenaed all HOA records related to the lodge project, including financial records, meeting minutes, and all correspondence about the survey. When the documents arrived, Thomas called me to his office. "You need to see this." Spread across his conference table were dozens of documents. Thomas pointed to a series of emails. "These are from Sharon Pembroke to other board members. Look at the dates." I read through them. The emails showed that Sharon had pushed hard for the lodge project, despite some board members expressing concerns about the cost and location. In one email, a board member named Richard questioned whether they actually owned the clearing land. Sharon's response was dismissive. "The clearing is clearly outside any private property. It's been used by everyone for years. That makes it community land." "That's not how property law works," Thomas said. "You can't just declare land as community property because people walk through it." But look at this next email. The next one was Sharon writing to someone named Bill Henderson at an email address that supposedly belonged to Henderson County Survey Services. The email said, "Bill, we need the survey completed as soon as possible. Just confirm that the clearing is community land and we can move forward with permits." "She's telling the surveyor what results she wants," I said. "Exactly. But here's the kicker. I called the real Henderson County Survey Services. There's no Bill Henderson who works there. Never has been. That email address is fake." So she created a fake email address and had a fake conversation with herself to make it look like a survey was done. That's what it looks like. And then she submitted those documents to the county to get permits. That's fraud. That's forgery. That's potentially multiple felonies. The full hearing was intense. Judge Steinberg was not happy as Thomas presented the evidence of the fake survey, the suspicious emails, the lack of any legitimate documentation. The HOA's lawyer, Richard Carrington, looked increasingly uncomfortable as the hearing progressed. At one point, he requested a recess to consult with his clients. When they came back, Sharon Pembroke was pale and looked like she might be sick. Richard addressed the court. "Your Honor, after reviewing the evidence presented, the HOA is withdrawing its claim to the property in question. We acknowledge that the land belongs to Mr. Walters." Judge Steinberg leaned forward. "That's not all you're going to do. Mr. Carrington, your client submitted fraudulent documents to obtain building permits. That's a serious crime. Your Honor, I don't think we need to make assumptions about intent. I'm not making assumptions. The evidence is clear. I'm referring this matter to the district attorney for criminal investigation. Mrs. Pembroke, you should consult with a criminal defense attorney." Sharon stood up, shaking. "Your Honor, I made a mistake. I thought the land was community property. I was trying to do something good for the neighborhood. By creating fake surveys and fake emails, by committing fraud. That's not a mistake, Mrs. Pembroke. That's deliberate criminal conduct. This court rules in favor of Mr. Walters. The property is confirmed as his. The HOA is ordered to remove all construction materials from the property within 30 days and restore the land to its previous condition. Mr. Walters is entitled to seek damages for the unauthorized use of his property. As I said, the criminal matters will be handled separately." This hearing is adjourned. The courtroom buzzed with conversation. I saw Sharon talking urgently with her lawyer, tears running down her face now. Part of me felt sorry for her, but only a small part. She had tried to steal my land through fraud and deception. Outside the courthouse, Thomas shook my hand. "Congratulations, you won completely. What happens now with the criminal stuff? That's up to the DA. Based on what we presented, I'd expect charges to be filed. Fraud, forgery, possibly theft. She could be looking at serious prison time if convicted." Over the next few weeks, things moved quickly. The HOA hired a demolition crew that removed all the construction from my clearing. They had to tear down the entire lodge structure, which was probably worth $80,000 in materials and labor. All of it hauled away because Sharon Pembroke couldn't be bothered to do an honest survey. The district attorney did file charges. Sharon was arrested and charged with multiple felonies, including fraud, forgery, and theft by deception. The local news covered the story, and it became a bit of a sensation. HOA president arrested for trying to steal homeowners' land to build community lodge. The story practically wrote itself. I was interviewed by a few news outlets. I kept my comments simple. I bought property, the HOA tried to build on it without permission, I proved it was mine, and the truth came out. The news crews loved to film the empty clearing where the lodge had been, showing the torn-up ground where construction had happened. The HOA fell apart after that. 3 of the 5 board members resigned immediately. The remaining 2 called an emergency meeting where the homeowners voted to dissolve the HOA entirely. Nobody wanted to be part of an organization that had just committed massive fraud. Sharon Pembroke eventually pleaded guilty to reduce charges to avoid a trial. She was sentenced to 18 months in prison and 5 years of probation, plus restitution for the costs incurred by the county in the investigation and for damages to my property. My lawyer helped me file a civil suit as well, which was settled for $120,000, paid by the HOA's insurance. As for the clearing, I left it as a clearing. I had enough drama with that piece of land. I put up a nice bench there and planted some wildflowers around the edges. Sometimes I go out there in the mornings with my coffee, just like I used to, and enjoy the peace and quiet. The whole experience taught me some valuable lessons. First, never assume that people in positions of authority know what they are doing or are acting in good faith. Second, documentation is everything. If I hadn't kept my original survey, this could have been a much harder fight. Third, some people become so convinced of their own righteousness that they'll commit crimes and not even realize they're doing something wrong. About 6 months after everything was settled, I ran into Dorothy, the former HOA board member who had questioned Sharon during that heated meeting. She stopped by my house one afternoon and apologized. "I should have pushed back harder when Sharon wanted to move forward with the lodge," Dorothy said. "Some of us had concerns, but she was so confident, so sure that everything was legitimate. I should have demanded to see the survey documentation before we broke ground." "You weren't the one who committed fraud," I said. "No, but I was part of the board that approved the project. I feel responsible." "Did you know Sharon well?" Dorothy shook her head. "Not really. She moved here about 4 years ago from Charlotte. She was very involved from the start, always wanting to improve things, organize events, make the neighborhood better. I think she meant well initially. But somewhere along the way, she started to believe that what she wanted was the same as what was right. And when reality didn't match her vision, she decided to change reality instead of changing her plans. That seemed to sum it up pretty well. Sharon had wanted a community lodge. She had found what she thought was the perfect spot. And when the actual property boundaries didn't cooperate with her vision, She faked a survey rather than accept that she needed to find a different location or drop the project entirely. The criminal case generated enough publicity that I started getting calls from people across the country with their own HOA horror stories. Someone in Florida had their house painted by the HOA without permission because it was supposedly the wrong shade of beige. Someone in Arizona had been fined thousands of dollars because their desert landscaping violated rules about grass coverage. Someone in Texas had their car towed from their own driveway because it was a pickup truck, and the HOA rules only allowed passenger vehicles in view from the street. I didn't have solutions for any of them, but I listened. It seemed like HOAs brought out something strange in people, this mixture of petty tyranny and bureaucratic overreach. When you gave people just a little bit of power over their neighbors, some of them couldn't help but abuse it. About a year after the whole incident, I was contacted by a documentary filmmaker who was doing a piece about HOA abuses. They wanted to interview me and film the clearing. I agreed, figuring the story should be told. The documentary aired on a streaming service a few months later. My segment was about 15 minutes in a 90-minute film. They did a good job presenting the facts, and they even got an interview with Sharon Pembroke, who was out on parole by then. In the interview, Sharon looked different than I remembered, smaller somehow, diminished. She talked about how she had gotten so focused on making the neighborhood perfect that she lost perspective. She acknowledged what she did was wrong and illegal. She said she thought about it every day. I didn't feel much sympathy. She had tried to steal my land. She had committed fraud. She had earned her consequences. But I did think about what Dorothy had said about Sharon meaning well initially. There was probably a universe where Sharon had been a good HOA president, where she had organized nice community events and helped neighbors resolve disputes, where she had made the neighborhood genuinely better. But that wasn't the universe we lived in. In our universe, she had let her desire for control override her ethics, and it had cost her everything. The clearing is peaceful now, exactly as it should be. The wildflowers I planted have spread and naturalized. In spring, there are butterflies and bees everywhere. In summer, the grass grows tall and golden. In fall, the surrounding trees drop their leaves and create a carpet of red and orange. In winter, snow covers everything in pristine white. I still take my coffee out there most mornings when the weather is nice. I sit on the bench and listen to the birds and watch the sun filter through the trees. It's my land, properly surveyed and documented and defended. Nobody is going to build on it. Nobody is going to tell me what I can or cannot do with it. Sometimes I think about how close I came to losing it. If I had ignored the construction for even a few more days, the lodge might have been completed. If I had not kept my original survey documents, proving ownership might have been much harder. If I had not had the resources to hire a lawyer and a surveyor, the HOA might have gotten away with it. That bothers me. How many people out there have been bulldozed by their HOAs, literally or figuratively, because they couldn't afford to fight back or didn't know their rights? How many people have paid unjust fines, accepted unreasonable restrictions, or lost property because an HOA said so, and they didn't have the knowledge or resources to challenge it? I wish I could say the dissolution of our HOA made the neighborhood worse, that we needed that organization to maintain order. But honestly, everything is fine. People maintain their properties because they have pride in their homes, not because someone threatens them with fines. Neighbors help each other because we choose to, not because it's mandated by bylaws. The entrance landscaping is maintained through a simple voluntary fund that costs less and works better than the HOA dues ever did. We didn't need someone like Sharon Pembroke telling us how to live. We just needed to be left alone to make our own choices about our own property. The last I heard, Sharon moved away after her parole ended. Someone told me she went to live with family in another state, trying to start over. I hope she learned something from the experience. I hope she never gets involved in an HOA again. As for me, I have my land, my clearing, my peace and quiet. That's all I wanted in the first place, back when I bought this property 6 years ago. I wanted a place away from the noise and complications of city life, a place where I could have some space and some privacy. I got what I wanted, but I had to fight for it. That shouldn't have been necessary, but I'm glad I fought. I'm glad I didn't just accept Sharon's confident assertions that the land was not mine. I'm glad I did the research, hired the professionals, and stood up for my property rights. The bench in the clearing has a small plaque on it now. My lawyer suggested it half as a joke, but I actually had it made. The plaque reads, "Private property properly surveyed, properly defended." It makes me smile every time I see it. It's a reminder of the whole bizarre episode, but also a reminder that I won. The clearing is mine. The land is mine. And no HOA is ever going to tell me otherwise again. On quiet mornings, sitting on that bench with my coffee, I sometimes imagine what would have happened if the lodge had been completed. Sharon would have held her grand opening celebration, probably with catered food and speeches about community. People would have started using the building for meetings and events. It might have been years before anyone seriously questioned the property ownership, and by then, the HOA would have claimed adverse possession or some other legal theory to justify their theft. But that didn't happen. I caught it early. I fought back. I won. The forest clearing where the HOA built their lodge, where they landscaped and planned and envisioned their community center, where they put up those fraudulent survey stakes with orange tape, remains exactly what it was always meant to be. A natural opening in the woods, a peaceful spot, a place of quiet beauty. My land, my clearing, my choice, and that's exactly how it should be.